Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Scott Stewart, founder and CEO of Venture for Canada, and your host. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and young Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneurial mindset and skills. In Season 2, we'll be chatting with young Canadians about their unconventional career trajectories and what it's like to be young entrepreneurial leaders. I'm excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive. I am super excited to have Stewart Hillhouse on A New Wave of Entrepreneurship today. Stewart is a 2017 Venture for Canada Fellow and the head of audience growth at Customer Camp. He is the host of the Top of Mind podcast and writes at stewarthillhouse.com. Stewart, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. The sun is shining in Fredericton, so fingers crossed that this is real spring and not a fake spring, and then we'll get a second winter. But I think it's feeling good.
It's also very warm here in Toronto today. It's around close to 15 degrees. So I agree. Spring has sprung after a long winter. What's it been like in the during the pandemic in Fredericton?
Yeah, I mean, we're lucky enough in New Brunswick. It hasn't been, the numbers proportionately are very low, but the measures that they've taken have been very serious. And so I appreciate that things are coming to an end. It was definitely some intense moments when there would be explosions, and our infrastructure is just a lot smaller. So a wave of cases actually would lead to a lot of issues in the healthcare system. So I think I'm really proud of how people here handled it, but I'm definitely looking forward to getting together with some friends and enjoying the summer together.
I was thinking back to when we first met, Stewart, and you were pursuing a graduate degree in forestry at a University of New Brunswick. And then since then, you found your passion in a different field, which is marketing. So can you give advice to listeners on how in particular, people who are relatively recent graduates can find their passion or kind of vocation?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say that I did it on purpose, but forestry is very different than marketing. And I think looking back, what I think helped me the most was taking opportunities. Like I came to New Brunswick to go to UNB as an opportunity. I was fortunate enough to do that, but at the same time, like that was unorthodox compared to what everyone else at my school was doing. So, and then when I would have those summer job opportunities, forestry was unique where you could go kind of East Coast, West Coast, up north. There's a lot of opportunities to try things, and that was very helpful for me to get early on kind of job experience. And what was really valuable for me was identifying things that I didn't like doing. To me, that was almost more important than figuring out what I did like. It was finding things that I didn't like, and that's allowed me to kind of start constraining what it is that it interests me based on stuff that I know doesn't interest me. And so, yeah, then as I was kind of wrapping up forestry, I was interested in the business side of things, but forestry didn't really give me that kind of exposure. And so when you and I met, I was interested in VFC for that kind of area of opportunity to be introduced to business in a very hands-on way. I didn't necessarily want to go do an MBA at that point, and still don't really, because I found like I've kind of gotten my MBA from working at early stage places. And then I think marketing sort of came into the picture a couple years out of school after working at a very small 2-person startup. I'd always just kind of, at the end of the day, figured I was always more interested in doing these kind of things, like chatting with other people, thinking of ideas and then executing on kind of the promotion and communication of those ideas. But it was never really cut and dry, like, oh, I'm definitely going to get into marketing. It was very gradual. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, that's what you call the things I like to do? It all falls under the marketing umbrella? Okay, cool. I guess I'm a marketer now. So that's kind of that's been the evolution from forestry to startup to marketing in the last, it's only been about 5 years, I guess.
What first brought you into studying forestry out of interest?
There was one, and this sticks in my head, and it's crazy how it's stuck in my head. Like that was almost 10 years ago, but it was like crossing the street, and I grew up in Yonge and Lawrence in Toronto, so like in the city, and I was walking to school and just was crossing a small intersection and like almost got hit by a car, and they honked at me. And I was like, okay, this is a little weird. I think I'd like to try something a little bit more like a smaller place. I'd always had interest in outdoor and sustainability stuff like that. And uh, when I applied to UNB, it was kind of a joke because they had an acceptance on the spot opportunity where you could just show up with your transcript, and then they went down your grades with their finger and calculated it on a calculator, and then looked at your average and said, well, we can give you forestry. Like it was a question if I wanted to get into it. It's like, yeah, sounds good. And so it was it was kind of by accident, but at the same time, I was really interested in that opportunity, and applied to a whole bunch of other like environmental programs. But at the end of the day, that one just it balanced that idea of like environmentalism, but balanced with some type of I wouldn't like kind of business, but there is a very tangible thing that forestry offers, and it is a very actionable way to improve our climate situation. And not saying that that is like the only reason I went into it. I thought it was just a cool program, and it was kind of weird. So maybe that's the wrong answer that people don't want to hear. That sometimes you just got to do weird stuff, but it was different and worked out.
I agree. I think on along someone's kind of career path, one continues to gain career clarities, and often you learn as
Mm-hmm.
much from the things you don't like than the things that you do like. I can think of when I was a student, I did a bunch of different internships on for a couple different things, and I remember one internship I worked for a political like in essence a lobbying firm, and I hated it. It was like my least favorite thing that I did. And I always thought, oh, lobbying would be kind of interesting. And then after I did that experience, I was like, no, never doing
Yeah,
something in that kind of sector kind of again. By the way, I think that it's a great thing about internships and just shorter duration work experiences at the beginning of one's careers. It can give that enhanced clarity of what one likes and what one doesn't like.
absolutely. Yeah, I kind of joke thinking that I think that the first kind of 4 months of any job are the most exciting period. So how awesome would it be just to be able to jump from job to job and only do 4 month stints? Like that's the best time. But that was what my forestry degree allowed me, was to go travel across Canada, getting paid to be in the woods, and exploring kind of. I went to Vancouver Island. I was in Edmonton. So it really allowed me to explore the West Coast and then come back to school on the East Coast and then see my parents in Ontario in between. So allowed for traveling too, which is nice.
Totally. It's definitely traveling is something I think we're all looking forward to post COVID. I don't think I appreciated the changing of perspectives and being in a different environment more so today than ever before. Uh, on your website, stewarthillhouse.com, you write on a really wide variety of topics, and I think you're an excellent writer. What tips do you have for recent grads on how they can enhance their professional writing skills?
Yeah. One thing that I am have now realized, now that I kind of identify as a writer. That's a weird thing to say. I think this is probably the first time I've said it out loud as like identifying as a writer or as something I do. But it's different. It's way different than educational writing and academic writing. So if you're used to writing essays for school, you're probably you probably don't have a great relationship with writing. So I would suggest for anyone who would like to improve their relationship with writing, because I think it's a very powerful professional and personal tool that not a lot of people do, and it really sets you apart if you do it. Um, is to just like kind of take note of the things in your day to day that make your ears perk up or get you thinking about uh, a new idea. And this doesn't need to be original thought. I think that's one thing that I did early on when I was writing, is I'd always try and have an original thought. and then say, okay, I'm going to write a massive blog post on this, and I'm going to upload it, and it's going to go viral, and then I'm going to be a breakout sensation. That is never going to, like, that doesn't happen. So don't worry about that. But I always tried to boil the water. I always tried to boil the ocean with every piece that I would write, and I never ended up finishing them. And so something that I've started doing recently that's really helped is to take note of whatever like content you're already consuming, whether it be a book, a podcast, or even just like on social, or even in conversations that you have with your peers or roommates or family. Whenever there's something that is like, oh, like you can feel it physically that was a good point, just like kind of jot it down in the notes of your phone or whatever, and what about it got you excited. And then right there, you've got an 80% written micro blog, like micro essay. The best advice I can give is like, write about the smallest thing possible in detail, because then all of a sudden you can have a box around it rather than it being like an overflowing ocean of ideas. Like, just write about that single tiny thing in as much nuance and detail as possible. And over time, if you keep writing like that, you'll start seeing the connections between your ideas start to take form. Kind of like we were saying earlier, like, it's way easier looking back on your career than looking forward. So once you look back on all these things you've written, then you're like, oh, I really do have an original opinion about topic XYZ. It just took me 30 micro essays to figure it out. That's kind of what that's been my change in mindset recently about how I write, is that I don't write about massive topics. I write about the smallest possible topic. And usually it's an idea that I steal from someone else, and then I explain why it meant something to me.
Two things really resonated that you talked about. I think the first is writing down ideas as soon as they come up. So writing them on your phone, writing them on an app. I think it's an important part of creativity is recording those things immediately so you don't forget them, because we all have so many different thoughts that come up. And I think the second thing is focusing on writing on a very specific topic, and also recognizing that there's 7 billion people in the world and many more people who have lived in the past. And there's no completely original idea. That everything is, to some extent a permutation or influenced by other kind of concepts. So not to feel the pressure to write something that is like 100%, like obviously in someone's own words, but that all ideas are cross pollinations with others. And I think a lot of people put too much pressure on themselves to be 100% original.
Yeah. And especially there's a really great artist and writer named Austin Kleon, and he's got this really short, it's almost like a picture book, called Steal Like an Artist. And that's pretty much the thesis and is in the title, is all the best artists steal ideas, but they're artists because they make it their own. And that's a cool book if someone's interested in starting to get into creative writing or any type of kind of creative work, but are kind of feeling like they don't know where to start. His books are really helpful on those early days mindset stuff.
I'll have to check that out. And Steal Like an Artist, I think it's a great kind of concept. And it reminds me of, I remember studying in school ancient Roman history, and how the Romans were in many cases not the most innovative in the sense of creating their own ideas. They often would take what the Greeks had studied and done, and just make kind of little adjustments to make the things better. And it's the same on so many different things. Like Facebook was not the first social network. There's MySpace and other things. But then they executed that. Now Facebook is a more certainly more controversial kind of entity. But certainly from a business perspective, they built a very successful business. And they weren't necessarily the first mover, but they were able to adapt other people's ideas in an effective way. So your point very much resonates.
Yeah, it also helps you to concrete those ideas in your head. It makes sense to you. Almost that idea of teaching helps you to learn something a second time. Writing is teaching yourself a second time before you even teach someone else. So I am a huge advocate for personal writing, and then writing in public too, as a way of getting your voice out there.
I agree. Writing in public, I think, is super important. I write a fair amount just to myself, and then I've written a fair amount kind of publicly. And I think when you write publicly, there's just that additional pressure that of other people reading it, of kind of, even if it's going on a personal post or if it's going on different things, I find that I hold myself to a different standard, and both are important. I think private writing can be helpful for contemplation and lots of and also to kind of refine someone's craft. But when you actually put it out there, I think it's like putting yourself in the arena and
Yeah.
helping also develop sort of thicker skin over time.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So on your podcast, you cover a really wide range of different topics. And by the way, the Top of Mind podcast is awesome, and I really recommend that our listeners go check it out after this episode. So one of the topics you cover is kind of content ideas, and one question I have for you is, how can someone find inspiration especially if you're like a marketer of a company and you're thinking of content marketing kind of ideas? How can content marketers find inspiration for different relating to different topics?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily a content marketer by trade, but everyone kind of is a content marketer these days. You need to have a voice. Well, you don't need to. You don't need to do anything, but there are advantages from a business perspective and from an individual perspective to be putting out ideas into the world, because it gives people, passerbys, strangers, a signal and like a flag that they can see and know what you're talking about. And if they find you interesting, they'll come on in and explore a little bit more. And there you might have a new customer, a new job offer, or just like a new internet friend. And so I think it's important to be doing. But in terms of the inspiration side of it, something that was really helpful for me, especially in the early days of putting out marketing content as a amateur marketer, like in my first year with no formal training, the biggest kind of framing that worked for me was to create content like you're a investigative journalist, rather than trying to be a thought leader right off the bat. When we think of creating content, you always think about being like a thought leader and having these very dramatic viewpoints and point of view of the industry, and that's what makes you powerful or whatever, or influential. But reporters are like the best example of people who can make content every single day. They're writing articles, they're doing in reports, and they have an endless amount of topics that they can cover, because their job is to find the most interesting person who knows about a topic, and then find out about them, ask them a few questions, and then like expand on it, and then make sense for the reader of how those ideas play into their lives. And so that was my biggest, that helped me out the most with me, my content and the content I do for my company. And I continue to do, is just always to think like a journalist, an investigative reporter, and write that way too, being like, oh, industry says this, but this person says this. Like, you could always say, here is, from my perspective, here's what I'm seeing, is a lot less intimidating from an early stage perspective, as opposed to like saying, here is how things work, and here is how it's going to work in the future. And so that's really helped me in my content journey.
I really like that. Think like a reporter. And I agree. Somebody can, there's lots of people who can publish things online. I think some people get notoriety through just publishing really controversial things, which can be super polarizing and not necessarily make someone look good.
But like that's a choice too.
Yeah.
Those people chose to be controversial, and that's an effective method, but you don't need to do that. You don't need to put yourself out there from day one and get your head chopped off with every single post you do. It might lead to like the algorithm wanting to show your stuff, but is that really the kind of game you want to be playing? Do you really want to be purposely trying to piss people off just so you get more views? That doesn't make sense to me. The reason why I'm doing this content stuff is a long play to be part of the conversation and to allow for opportunities to come from from being part of the conversation. It's not to try and get X number of followers by this date so that I can turn around and try and monetize them or something like that. That's a way of thinking about it, but that's not the way I'm thinking about it. And so maybe my way is a slower growth method, but it feels right for what I'm trying to do and the outcome I'm looking for and the kind of people I want to be attracting.
I agree, and I think it depends on the topic. If someone's like a political blogger about on certain topics and they're have a certain viewpoint, sometimes being super controversial can be helpful for building their audience. But I think for many other things, having more of that investigative and even a sort of more balanced approach to kind of argumentation is probably helpful in the long run. On this topic of content marketing, to your point, sort of 10 years ago, content marketing was emerging as this new thing. Oh, writing blog posts or doing it, and now it's something, to your point, everybody does. And certainly content marketing has evolved a lot in the last 10 years. In the beginning days, a lot of it was just about SEO and how can you put as many keywords in, and obviously that has kind of evolved over time. What do you think that content marketing looks like in the next kind of 10 years?
Yeah, I disagree with your point about content marketing being new. I think content marketing's been around since the printing press. Like the first person to purposefully mention a brand name in a written form or put up a poster or anything that has a commercial reason behind it, like that's content marketing. It just so happens now that the channels are free to use, anyone can be part of them, and the tools to make your own content, like us on this right now. This is a virtual, everything about this is virtually free, but this is, even 50 years ago, we would have needed a whole television studio from my place to your place to make this happen. So that's just how crazy that's the opportunity right now. But in the future, I think it will, I don't know what the technologies are going to look like or what the channels are going to look like or what the tactics are, but I think that from a strategy perspective, being as helpful and entertaining as possible will always lead to people paying attention to you. And that is kind of, at the end of the day, is the purpose, if you're doing it from a marketing perspective, is to have people thinking about you and engaging with you and seeing you as a leader in whatever area you want to be part of. And so there's two ways of doing that: being enraging or being helpful, right? And then on the helpful side, you can also be entertaining as well. So I think the best content marketers are going to be ones who have help, are always providing help to the people who are paying attention to them. And then entertaining is just like, you need to be entertaining because who wants to watch or listen to a boring TV show or a boring like recording? That's just kind of entertainment and distribution 101 is like, it needs to have like what's in it for the audience members. And so entertaining and helpful, I think, are the future in the broadest sense possible.
I love that. To be helpful and entertaining, I think content marketing, and I agree. I think content marketing as a phrase is a newer, is a repackaging of something that has been around for a long time. And I think it was probably emerged in the kind of the beginning, the early stages of blogging and kind of the use of those terms. But it exists pre-internet as well.
Yeah, and I wish there was a better word for content. I even though I'm in that industry, it just feels like a really bland word, but it's so it encompasses everything from a tweet to an hour-long video interview. Like this is content, but I wish there was a more sophisticated maybe, or just like less half thought kind of name for it. So if anyone has a better word for it, please let me know.
I agree. I think that it's become a kind of almost a cliche in the way that, and it's used so broadly that it becomes almost meaningless in some ways.
Yeah. And then I love too content about content. That's, and I mean, I do that. So I'm a bit of a hypocrite, but like creating content about creating content is just a funny world.
One thing I've noticed, and you have a great blog post on this topic, is about using LinkedIn and LinkedIn posts to kind of drive traffic, and how to write a great LinkedIn post that generates a significant amount of engagement. So, what advice do you have for listeners on how to use LinkedIn from a content sharing perspective, not the social network necessarily aspect of it? But yeah, what advice do you have to for listeners on how to write an excellent LinkedIn post?
LinkedIn is definitely a content platform, kind of what you just mentioned there. Everyone thinks that, or it's old hat used to be, oh, LinkedIn's how you network. LinkedIn's really a content platform, just like all of them. You can network on any platform if you figure out the ways of the game, but like the the fastest way to network is by making content, I'd say. And so yeah, it's intimidating at first. It's weird at first. You're like, what do I have to say to the world? Um, but remember to be a reporter. Like, just report on things that you're learning about. So my first year in marketing, it was awesome to share that on LinkedIn because I was just talking about the the marketing book I read over the weekend. I was talking about the tool that I found, or anything like that. But in terms of actually composing a good LinkedIn message, follow a bunch of people who post every day, who have who you like the style of too. Because back to the point about you can be creating content, but if the style doesn't match what you want to be eventually, then don't even bother with that person. Like, if it's cringy, or if it's using all these tactics that you just don't agree with, then don't pay attention to that. Pay attention to people who do high quality stuff consistently. So have those in your feed so that you're seeing good people, so you can get inspired by that. But this is a really posting on LinkedIn is just a great way to practice effective communication. So I kind of came across a few copywriting frameworks that I think about really frequently when I'm writing. My favorite and the most basic but effective one is AIDA framework, which stands for attention, interest, desire, action. And so if you just kind of think about that every time you write, even like it could be LinkedIn, or it could be a description of something, it could be the format for a longer piece. AIDA, open with something that gets their attention, makes them stop. That should be something that's like very choppy, and lead with the big idea, like lead with the punchline on your actions. Attention sentence. Attention. Interest is then get them interested in why they should keep reading. And the best kind of short form for that is every sentence should make the person want to read the next sentence. Like, make every sentence tied to the next one. Attention, interest, desire, like what should talk about what the person who's reading it desires. So if you're in a sales role and you want the other person, you know that other salespeople desire closing more effectively, make that kind of the desire section. Like, oh, and here's what I learned about closing faster, or something like that. Like, tie it back to a desire. And then action isn't necessarily always necessary, especially because it can feel pretty formulaic if you're always ending your post with, oh, I've written more about this on my website over at stewarthillhouse.com. Like, that's fine. But even the action doesn't even need to be a clicking action. It can just be a think about this. Like, next time you see this, think about this. And that's a really helpful way to kind of close off your thought and also embed yourself in their mind. And they're like, oh, what did Scott want me to think about next time I see a dog walking down the street? Oh yeah, it was that. I remember seeing that and that's how you kind of double dip in someone's mind, because they read it on LinkedIn and then they actually recalled it when they saw the thing that they wanted to see.
That's excellent advice, and I agree. There's some people who have fantastic content on LinkedIn. There's also a lot of
Yeah.
LinkedIn
Yeah.
spam posting, and not the highest quality content. And I think the device you have is really great. And our experience with Venture for Canada is that LinkedIn is a amazing way to reach people from a content perspective, and certainly we actually find LinkedIn from an enterprise perspective is actually like our LinkedIn company page at Venture for Canada is the main lever in which we reach people. It's more effective than any other social channel that we have.
Amazing.
So LinkedIn is definitely like a really powerful tool, and it's also actually where we have the largest number of followers. We're very active. So, by the way, plug if you want to check out Venture for Canada, follow us on LinkedIn.
It's a great platform. Like I've met tons of people there. I've been offered freelance gigs. I've been offered jobs. I've been asked by my peers to like get on their podcasts. It's a terrific spot to if the people who you're seeing on your feed and the people in your direct messages are cool, you're doing it right. If the people in your feed and in your direct message are cringy and not the kind of people you would want to have a coffee or beer with in real life, you're doing something wrong. That's kind of my litmus test of, is the stuff I'm doing good or not? Are these people who I'd want to have a beer with in real life?
I agree, and I think somebody has to be discerning about who they accept from LinkedIn.
My cold LinkedIn ad sentence, like, you know, you can add someone and then you give a little blurb, and this one works for me like 90% of the time, is, hey Scott, you have to do a little research like everything, and so you just go to their like most recent content, and you just look at what their most recent thing is, and you say, hey Scott, really interesting perspective on that article you just wrote about. I'd love to see more of your content and learn more about your work. Cheers, Stewart. And that's it. Like if you make it about them saying like, I'd love to see more of your content, you'll get added every single time.
One strategy somebody used on me recently, which was highly effective actually, was I had a typo way down on my LinkedIn page around something I did in university. And I had been there for a while and I just never noticed it. And the person politely messaged me and said, by the way, you have this little typo down here. Like, you know, and the way she wrote it was very classy. You know, somebody could write it kind of mockingly. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, let's chat. Like this is, but it was a creative way to kind of grab my attention.
Oh yeah, you gotta be creative, and that attention is like the most important part.
Agreed, and to add value, right? Like she immediately added value for me for catching something that I wasn't able to do. Another topic that you've written and spoken about is influencer marketing, which is to your point, influencer marketing is probably a term for something that's been around for a long time. Nike, for instance, when they were first getting going, would pay, you know, Farrah Fawcett or famous actors and actresses to wear shoes with that Nikes. And this was like the early 70s, and I'm sure influencer marketing and aspects of it have existed a lot earlier. But obviously, with the rise of social media and in particular Instagram, influencer marketing is bigger today probably than it ever was before. So what advice do you have for marketers on how to leverage influencers and influencer marketing to grow their brands?
I'll be totally honest. I've only spoken to people who are influencer marketing tradespeople through the podcast. So I've never actually run my own influencer campaigns, and I've never paid someone to do anything. So I can speak to it, but I wanted to put that up front. Like I've never operated a content marketing campaign. So I'm just doing this anecdotally because I am a reporter, as I've said a bunch of times. But from what I'm hearing about the people who do this day to day as their job, is you should think about influencer marketing not about getting it in front of as many eyeballs as possible, but really finding someone who your ideal customer listens to. That's all it is like, do they pay attention to this person and trust them in some way, and would be willing to listen to a suggestion from them? And that is what the best content, kind of organic influencer content looks like. It is a suggestion saying, oh, and by the way, I use this. If you are like me at all, this will work for you as well. And then that's pretty much it. Like if you can find long-term partnerships with creators who are attracting the right people, because again, their audience might not be your ideal customer. Like the creator themselves, let's say, is let's say they create content about productivity and self-improvement. Their audience might not be people who are good at productivity and self-improvement. They're actually probably the people who are looking to improve. Like they're lazy and they don't have good systems and all those things. So if you're trying to sell an organization software, yes, that person is your ideal target, but their audience might not be the right one because the audience is a few steps behind the creator. So you have to think about it that way as well. Is like, yes, the creator might align, but the audience that they have might not be ideal. And so treat it like any other business relationship where you need to do your due diligence. You need to learn about them and understand what their values are and where they're going and what the terms of the engagement are going to be. And then, there's a couple episodes I have speaking with people who are in the influencer marketing world, and they all emphasize that long-term brand building and brand kind of spokespeople is the way to go. Just kind of build those relationships over time.
Yeah, finding that strong alignment between kind of an influencer and a brand, and who, thinking of that, who are the individuals that one's ideal customers trust the most, and then building that long-term relationship. I think that makes so much sense. And there's a lot of risk for brands with influencer marketing. Like doing one's due diligence is super important. If you spend all this partnership with somebody, and then the influencer ends up getting in a massive scandal, or I think of like Subway, where the Jared guy who ends up being like a pedophile. It has this huge blowback for a company. So it really is important to do one's due diligence, that an influencer doesn't have all this baggage. Particularly if you're doing really close partnership with them.
Yeah. It's I saw a funny one of someone talking about the resurgence of mascots, because a mascot will never get drunk and do something regrettable because it's always created. So I thought that was pretty funny. It's like a worst case, yes, people are better at selling, but mascots might be the way to go.
Yeah, I once talked with somebody around. I remember Ask Jeeves, the search engine, the butler kind of person, and how so few brands actually have like a really strong kind of mascot. But it's funny with Ask Jeeves, which is not, I don't think, even around. I assume it hasn't been around for probably like 10 years. I still remember the Ask Jeeves like logo and like mascot. It's the only thing I remember from that dormant social media network or search engine from like 15 years ago. We've covered a ton of different topics today, Stewart, from talking about your origins in forestry to writing skills to how to write a great LinkedIn post to influencer marketing, content marketing. Really touched on a wide variety of topics. My final question to you is, what are 3 books that you recommend our listeners check out, and why do you recommend them?
One of the ones that was most, and it could have been the timing that it was given to me, that it was really influential, but Tim Ferriss has been I've listened to his podcast forever. And so then when I was given Tools of Titans, whenever that came out, I think that might've been 2013. And it just covers the gamut of self-improvement and just the frameworks for living a happy, healthy, and wealthy life. He literally breaks it down into healthy, wealthy, wise. Here's how you be healthy. Here's how you be happy. Here's how you be wise. And the foundations of that book, I think, are still present in kind of my day-to-day decision making and routines and things like that. It's a big Bible too. It's massive, but it's very consumable, and you can jump chapters. It's all broken out by different high performers who he interviews and gives a really detailed breakdown of specifics that they're known for. So that one's really great. What's another one? I really liked a book by Annie Duke called what's it called? Yeah, that's it. So she is a professional poker player, and it's all about the the mathematics behind decision making pretty much, but also how math and psychology overlap so much when it comes to decision making. And so the biggest takeaway I had from her book, Thinking in Bets, was some poker players go in and make big bets and then they go bust in the first 20 minutes. But poker players who actually make money, their whole strategy is stay in the game as long as possible and fold as much as possible and only play hands that you're guaranteed to win. And I think that's just a really cool way of reframing it, is like, stay in the game as long as possible. And that's kind of, I think, reflected in a lot of my thinking around brand building and writing and stuff like that, is like, I'm trying to do this for as long as possible, because good things happen to those who stay on the horse for that long. It just compounds over time. If you're looking for a marketing one, I think the only marketing book you really need to read is This Is Marketing by Seth Godin. There's 100,000 marketing books that come out each year, but that one, I think, just covers all the foundations. It'll be frustratingly unactionable the first time you read it, but again, it's all foundational thinking that, if applied to your day-to-day, you're like, oh, I know what tool to use, or I know what tactic to get this outcome. But that foundation, if you don't have that foundation, you can get distracted by shiny objects as they come up. So This Is Marketing by Seth Godin would be my number one marketing book.
Perhaps my favorite podcast out there, and I think his content, I always appreciate his like candor and honesty and just frankness and intellectual curiosity. And I actually very recently read Thinking in Bets, like maybe just like 2 weeks ago. So very, very recently and top of mind. And then that Seth Godin book also is a great one to check out. Stewart, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. In terms of our listeners, if you want to learn more about Stewart, I recommend you check out stewarthillhouse.com, and also to check out his Top of Mind podcast, where he has a ton of amazing content and interviews with a lot of different thought leaders in the marketing space. Stewart, it's been fantastic speaking with you today. That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stewart, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Juanita Lee Garcia and Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided, stated by our guests and our host, is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.